Hey all, so for today's video, I wanted to take another look at raiding. In World of Warcraft, I raided for about 15 years, and now I'm coming up on about 2 years in Final Fantasy XIV, so I thought it would be a good time to revisit this. Also, I tried raiding in World of Warcraft again, and it brought some things back into focus. But to start things off, let me give my quick Cliff Notes raiding history. So the first raid I did in World of Warcraft was Molten Core. And the funny thing about this was I actually had no plans to raid in World of Warcraft because I was already committed to raiding in Final Fantasy XI. But, you know, when some friends invited me to go, I couldn't say no, and that was all she wrote. Everything about the raid impressed me. I was blown away by the scale of it. The gigantic enemies you had to fight along the way felt so epic. And then there were the bosses, which I know by today's standard are very basic, but back then, they were really something special. And while all of that was really awesome, it was all of the innovations that converted me and kept me playing for so long. Blizzard designed all of their raids and encounters with the expectation that you were going to wipe a lot, which was completely different from what I was used to. When I was raiding in Final Fantasy XI, wiping was really bad. It meant that the boss could just spawn, or another guild could come out and claim it. There were even some encounters that took weeks of preparation to even spawn the boss, so failing would mean having to do all of that over again. So to wipe was brutal, and to add insult to injury, every time you died, you'd lose experience points and could even de-level. Also, wiping often meant a really long trek back, because there were no graveyards and your home point could be well over an hour away. So World of Warcraft did away with all of that, which made raiding so much more fun and accessible. You could always easily retry any encounter, graveyards made the trek back after a wipe a mild inconvenience, and I just thought that this made raiding so much better. And for a long time, it was the reason why I kept playing, even when expansions were going downhill and systems were being introduced that changed the game for the worst. That was until Shadowlands, the straw that broke many a camel's back. This was also when Final Fantasy XIV was blowing up, many of my guildmates were playing it, so of course I had to give it a try. And I was instantly hooked, and when I finally got to the raiding, it gave me the exact same feelings I had when I first raided in World of Warcraft. It made me realize a lot of the frustrations that I accepted didn't have to be. Okay, so like I said, Cliff Notes history. Now let's get to the comparing, and we'll begin with progression. So there's just something about it when mechanics that you've been working on for countless hours finally click, and the raid is moving perfectly in sync, and all that time and energy finally comes together. And now you're getting so close to the kill. You've had multiple low percent wipes. You're watching like a hawk as the last fragments of the boss's HP ticks down. You're shaking in your chair. Your hands are sweating. The boss is at 1%, 0.5%, 0.1%, and it goes down. Discord erupts with cheers, and it's one of the most adrenaline-pumping, best and hyped feelings. So that for me is what progression raiding is all about. And in that way, Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft are very similar. You figure out the mechanics, you execute, you take down the boss. But as I mentioned earlier, Final Fantasy XIV opened my eyes to aspects of World of Warcraft raiding that I accepted even though I didn't like. So one of those things is mechanics visual clarity, which can be really awful in World of Warcraft. A reason for that is the developers like to create thematic encounters, which sounds great on paper, but in practice what happens is many of the mechanics become cluttered and hard to see. For example, if you're fighting a fire boss, the mechanics, and even the arena will all have similar shades of red and orange. It can make things a real struggle to make out. That is frustrating enough to begin with, even more so when you are raiding at the highest difficulty and every mechanic can basically one-shot you. That's a huge problem and can make progression feel real bad. No one likes to die because a mechanic blended in with the floor. So to give an idea of just how bad it can be, there was actually an article written in PC Gamer on this problem. They said, quote, "WoW's telegraphs are so cluttered that even the best guild in the world is using darkening potions so that they can fight more effectively." When you feel the need to use a potion to darken your screen because mechanics can just be that hard to see, something has gone wrong with your design choices. Now, Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, generally does a great job with making mechanics clear, even when there's a ton of them going off at once. The telegraphs are clearly defined, and the ground effects have distinct graphics and borders that stick out. They might not be all that thematic and look rather gamey, but honestly, I would take that over what happens in WoW any day of the week. And a big reason World of Warcraft can get away with so much of that design choice is because of... So, in World of Warcraft, add-ons are a huge part of raiding, and if I'm being perfectly honest, I think they had a negative influence on it. Now, to be more precise, I mean the raid assist add-ons, the ones that put timers on your screen. They read the boss abilities and play sound effects whenever something bad is happening. You know, honestly, I think this might be one of the reasons Blizzard doesn't care so much if you can't see what's happening. But there's another problem here, and that is the tug of war between raid developers and add-on developers, which has led to encounters becoming more and more complex. Now, more complexity isn't bad per se, but it has gotten to a point where to remain competitive, you basically need to use these add-ons. So to give an idea of just how integral they are, in the World First race, the guilds competing actually have players there to create add-ons for them as they come across those complicated mechanics. So in Final Fantasy XIV, add-ons are not supported. It's as simple as that. If you go against the developer's wishes and download them anyways, you could be banned. Personally, I've never felt the need to use them because the encounters aren't created with them in mind. And honestly, not having to deal with add-ons has been such a huge relief. It's nice to be able to play the game without a bunch of added steps. You know, like finding the add-ons, learning how to set them up and use them, pulling your hair out whenever your favorite ones stop getting support. Not to mention all the different bugs and various performance hits that can occur. It can be a real headache. So for the next section, let's take a look at gearing. So when it comes to gear, something I really like about WoW is that it has a lot of gear with unique traits that change up your gameplay and make you feel really powerful. And that makes getting gear very exciting and something that you really look forward to. For example, I was really excited to get the newest 4-piece tier bonus for my Feral because it took an ability that was already a ton of fun to use, shortened its cooldown, and also added a burst window whenever you use it. You could really feel the difference in your damage. Now in Final Fantasy XIV, if I'm being perfectly honest, I have never looked forward to a piece of gear for gameplay purposes. In Final Fantasy XIV, gear is essentially stat sticks, and the differences they make aren't as noticeable as they are in World of Warcraft. But a benefit of that is Final Fantasy XIV is much more balanced. Now in World of Warcraft, balance can be all over the place. It's not uncommon to see certain classes and specs being significantly ahead or behind others, and that can be very frustrating, especially if you are the one near the bottom. Another problem in World of Warcraft is that sometimes a piece of gear defines a spec for a tier. You know, I've seen some trinkets that have had such a huge impact that if you don't have it, well, then you become a bench warmer for the raid progression, and that can really suck. Which brings us to how you actually get the gear. The two games handle this very differently. So in Final Fantasy XIV, gearing is straightforward with very little RNG. For normal mode and alliance raids, you can keep farming bosses until you get a drop, and that's when they begin their weekly lockout. For the normal raids, you get 1 drop per boss, and for the Alliance raid, it's 1 drop for the entire raid. Then you have the Trials, which have no loot lockout, so you can farm those until you have every drop that you want. So the Savage raids have weekly lockouts regardless of if you got gear, but it's handled really well. And that's for 2 reasons. For one, all the bosses drop a currency that you can save to trade for any gear on their respective loot tables. And the second reason is the bosses drop treasure coffers, like a ring or chest coffer. So whatever role opens the coffer decides if it's a piece for tank, healer, or DPS. And because of that, gear hardly ever goes to waste. In World of Warcraft, all raid encounters are on a weekly loot lockout regardless of getting gear, and for the most part, it's also all role-specific gear, which means it's possible to defeat a boss and have every drop be for roles that aren't in your raid. I've seen it happen so many times, and it sucks. Now, Blizzard actually did add a feature that I really like that makes getting your tier pieces easy. Basically, there's an NPC that allows you to trade for tiered pieces with a currency you get automatically and a piece of gear you currently have equipped. So if you wanted your tiered chess piece, for example, you trade the currency and your current chess piece, and then the NPC transforms it into the tiered chess piece. It's a really nice feature. Unfortunately, filling out the other slots is still complete RNG, and that can be especially annoying for trinkets and weapons, which tend to be huge upgrades for everyone, and they also have some of the worst drop rates. So the Great Vault is the last thing to mention about loot in World of Warcraft. And I hate this feature, mainly because it replaced the much better badge system, but also because it's basically like something you'd find in a gacha game. Honestly, gearing in World of Warcraft is quite the duality. I think the gear is really fun and interesting, but it can lead to balance issues, and all the RNG can make getting it a nightmare. Final Fantasy XIV might have less interesting gear, but it's also much more balanced, and you have more agency with gearing your character. So that's gearing in a nutshell. The next thing I wanted to look at is player attitudes.
Even side! Many whelps! Now handle it!
So that was an infamous clip of when a raid leader completely lost it during a raid encounter. Now, I've never experienced anything quite like that in all the time I've raided in WoW, but I've had many experiences where players get pretty angry. And it's one of the most awkward and uncomfortable things when someone in Discord or the chat flips out because a player messed up a mechanic or there was a wipe, or someone feels the need to be a complete ass because of low DPS. It would be one thing to say, hey, you know, your performance isn't quite where we need it, so we have to replace you, but that's not how it usually goes. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about a guild environment or between friends where that's just how they have fun. I'm talking about, like, actual anger. So far in Final Fantasy XIV, I have never come across anything like that, even with all the pugging I've done for various endgame content. The worst I've come across were players leaving the group without saying a word, following the sage-old advice, if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. So next up, let's take a look at balance and raid tuning. So I'm gonna throw shade at World of Warcraft right off the bat. I am not a fan of how Blizzard tunes and balances their raids, and this is something that I've had issues with for a long time. Blizzard likes to tune their raid encounters, and more specifically, end-tier raid encounters, around the world-first raiders. So when they are first released, they are basically like 14's Ultimates, where only the most devoted and determined players will beat them. But that isn't my issue. I actually really enjoy a challenge. The problem is, unlike 14, raids in World of Warcraft aren't evergreen content, so you can't spend a lot of time learning a single encounter, which you can do in 14. So the way the World of Warcraft developers handle this is, as the tier goes on, the encounters are nerfed over and over again, so that more guilds will be able to beat the raid before the next one is released. And maybe this isn't the biggest deal to a majority of raiders, but I hate that the only way to experience those encounters in their original form is by being in one of those hardcore progression guilds. That kind of sucks. Most players can't raid those kind of hours. That doesn't mean they aren't devoted and determined. You know, when I was still raiding Mythic, I was in a guild that raided 3 days a week, and very often we were progressing on one of those end-tier encounters, putting in hours of attempts, and it always felt like we were racing against the nerf clock, and not making it felt really bad and made all that progression feel kind of like we were wasting our time. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, not only are the raids generally better balanced, but they are also evergreen content. You can go back to raids released years ago and still get a similar experience. It might not be one for one, but it's pretty darn close. Also, in the time I've raided in Final Fantasy XIV, only one encounter has needed to be nerfed, and it was a 1% nerf to the HP. When you compare that to what you see in World of Warcraft, that's like nothing. In World of Warcraft, I've seen 30% nerfs to HP and like 80% reductions to damage. When you see nerfs that extreme, don't you kind of start to wonder if it's even the same encounter anymore? And that is a big reason why I think progression can be so very frustrating in World of Warcraft, and why I found it so much more rewarding in Final Fantasy XIV. The cinematic quality of the encounters, the set pieces, the direction, the visuals, the music, the spectacle, the scale, and how epic you feel while doing it. I think 14 nails all these aspects, and not only that, they have raised the bar. And that's not to say that there isn't spectacle in WoW. Usually every tier has at least that one encounter that delivers. For example, in the current tier, there's a boss named Tindril, and he has this phase where he turns into a bird and flies off to another platform, and then your entire raid summons their dragon mounts to chase after them, and then you get into this like mini game where you have to weave in and out of fireballs while collecting orbs. It's a really awesome and fun set piece. Unfortunately, most encounters aren't anything like that. They are comparatively very bland. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, the cinematic quality is amazing for basically every encounter. There's just so much attention to detail. Amazing telegraphs, really cool looking mechanics and boss models, the setting and arenas are amazing. All of that helps make the encounters feel so epic. And there are so many moments where you can't help but marvel at what is happening. It looks and feels so cool. Another big reason 14 encounters are so cinematic is the music. Practically every raid encounter has its own unique music that helps amp up whatever emotion it's trying to invoke, which, by the way, are all composed by the same guy, Masayoshi Soken. He writes music like Alexander Hamilton wrote to defend the US Constitution, non-stop. So having all that cinematic quality makes the encounters so much more than just the difficulty. It's the reason why I still find normal modes to be really fun, and why I enjoy doing the Alliance raids so much. And on the other side of it, it's also the reason why you'd want to jump into the harder modes. The bosses do some insanely cool things that you only get to experience there. So yeah, there was one area I wanted to get into, the difficulty, but because the games are so different and test very different skills, there really isn't much to say there. They can both get very challenging. I've had upwards of 600 plus wipes in both games, so if you want a challenge, you'll find it in both. I guess another area to quickly mention would be raid variety. I think Final Fantasy XIV blows World of Warcraft out of the water with that. You have the Trials, Normals, Alliance raids, Ultimates, and there are also the raids in Eureka and the Bajan Front. There's just so much variety, they feel very different, and that makes you want to do them all. Anyways, that will be all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye!